Oh, I think we're live.
Oh, shit. Try creating a new car. I just removed this destination.
It says live on my end.
Right. But we have to remove, unfortunately, Facebook. I don't know what happened there. Okay. Hello. It's John Firth from Firth and Friends. I have here my good friend Ahmed Alakash. And we're going to be talking about an interesting phenomenon, often technology-led, which is the rise and death of centralized organizations that has been part of the human experience since we've been able to speak and write. Ahmed runs a prestigious technology boutique that specializes in digital transformation and software development. His firm builds bespoke software solutions and mobile apps, Salesforce, ERP, cloud computing, fintech, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and crypto assets. He works with large and small firms, private equity firms. Besides managing the firm, he advises foreign governments, different types of funds, private equity, and C-suite exhibits on all matters relating to technology. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here.
Sorry.
In any case, this is going to be a very interesting subject. For those who are watching it now, you can make comments or ask questions. And for those of you who are going to watch the video, I hope you enjoy it. So, Ahmed, I'm going to throw it over to you. We're going to start with a little bit of a historical perspective on this topic.
Sure. So nice to be here and with you, John. I hope everybody else. It's an interesting idea, the idea of consensus, and how CEOs should build consensus to grow the companies. From the beginning of time, and we talked, me and you, John, about philosophy and history, most societies organize themselves in a hierarchical manner. And you end up with a class of people that claim to have a source of truth or the social truth. And that class would always be at the top. And then the bottom would have a different perspective towards the capacities of the elite classes. And as time goes by, you'd have disruptions happen. When people start thinking that this source of truth, I cannot trust, the social truth they have is not reality. And how can and this is affecting my livelihood. So you can have ancient societies like the Egyptians, where the pharaoh was the God's word, and then you have other societies like Mesopotamia, where there's a struggle between the religion and the palace, so the priests or the statesman who's in charge. Hammurabi basically was the statesman; he never claimed divinity. And disruption happens when people think that this source of truth, the social truth, is not something that I agree with. And then we touched a little bit about, me and you, about Plato and Aristotle, Plato's Republic, which is the seminal work in political theory and philosophy. He posits the philosopher kings, enlightened philosophers who should rule because everybody else is ignorant, as opposed to Aristotle's Politics, where he talks about the individual. The individual is the starting building block of the city or the society. The analogy could easily be drawn between companies, where you have the C-suite and you have the employees. And or technology in general. Well, we'll come to technology a little bit, but the disruption happens when you think too much that the elite are in charge, and we change differently. It changes the dynamic. So most disruptions happen. Essentially, can be described. They could be called revolutions. They could be wars, but a change in the perception of the source of truth and a decentralization.
In politics in particular. The concept of social politic or social truth, or what we call the social truth, is a sort of generally agreed to norms that results in things like the concept of time, which doesn't exist, as it does with so many of our concepts of work, 9 to 5, social norm, marriage, and so forth. In the business level, as you pointed out, it's about finding that source of truth. And that is the institutions, or I should say in politics, it's the institutions like the US government, the Federal Reserve, or the Catholic Church that are the sources of truth. There is a social truth, and they are the sources of disseminating it. And in the process, they become very powerful, and to the point, as you said, they become elite. And then along comes some change, usually because the population, the consumer, has a different idea of what the social truth is. In the case of business, it's often when a technology, a revolutionary technology comes along and changes our abilities to either to move faster, do things differently in a way that makes it faster, more effective, better. Printing press being an obvious one. Lighting, electric lighting, and so forth. For that, right now, it's the internet. And it's not so much that the internet showed up and everybody said, oh, let's start changing things. It was more some sort of pent-up belief or pent-up experience that somebody like Jeff Bezos could say, look, the process of buying books is so incredibly hard, and billions of people don't even have access to books. And he came up with this idea because the internet allowed, that was a technology that allowed for that. So let's talk a little bit now about sort of modern times and this whole concept of building consensus, given the disruptive forces occurring in the last couple of decades.
Sure. So the incident that comes to mind the most is the financial crisis of 2008 and how the banks collapsed, and how there's a lack of faith in the financial systems and how they're too big to fail and how the government built these banks. That's when the first Bitcoin and crypto manifesto came out, which is talking kind of about the same thing. It's a well-written white paper, I should say. I'm not a crypto bull. We build crypto engines. I don't own that much crypto. I charge my clients in US dollars just to let people.
Okay, yeah, it's just too much risk.
Yeah. But so the technology was predicated on the idea of the source of truth. The idea that we cannot let the banks, we cannot trust the banks. They cannot be a source of truth. We want to create a decentralized database, decentralized ledger, and move the source of truth from the elites, the controllers, to the masses, which sounds like an interesting idea. But when the masses are all anonymous, which is what blockchain is, you get all kinds of KYC and AML and know your clients, anti-money laundering. So the consensus idea of building consensus is at the core of blockchain and at the core of the miners. That's what mining is, consensus algorithms. But bringing back to a much higher level on technology, I think a stable company and a stable society is where you have consensus amongst people in it. When you believe as an individual, not when you understand the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? The why, not the how. There's a why question and the how question.
Right.
If you can communicate properly, why do we want to do this project? Why do we want to work with this? Why is this product coming out? And people believe in your vision, the consensus will have them on autopilot. They'll be supporting you without having a top-down approach. And I think that's what we're witnessing now when companies get disrupted, is when you have employees that don't believe in the mission of the company and just want it for a job.
I wrote a book on disruptive leadership. Actually, there's something a little bit different happening. It's not the employees. It's essentially the consumers building a new social truth. So the social truth, let's see if I can give a good example. The social truth was that you buy books at a bookstore. That was the social truth, and because that was the reality. You have to go to the bookstore. And the only other way is for between individuals to give each other, trade books and give them books, and then library. That was our social truth. That was because that was the experience, and it was generally accepted that was the way to get books, through schools and so forth. What Bezos did is say that no longer needs to be the social truth. We don't need these institutions. First of all, they're expensive. There's a lot of overhead, a lot of distribution costs through booksellers. Libraries have almost all but disappeared. That's real estate that could be maybe used for other purposes. And so a lot of these former centralized sort of sources of truth got disrupted and it got splintered. And it allowed the individual to have better choice and more opportunity to get the good and get the goods cheaper. And that's, part of disruption is the democratization of product, or something that's been confined to a central source of truth or the elite suddenly becomes available to the masses, usually cheaper and widespread. And at that point, no centralized institution can control it per se, even though we have the FDA and we have regulatory bodies. But there's always an active gray market for pharmaceuticals, something books are not really regulated per se. So things become quickly decentralized. In the process, Amazon has now become a big centralized institution. And they've certainly been coming under fire. The bigger you get, the more people, project and actively, try to nip at their heels. And who knows, one of these days, Amazon may be completely disrupted out of business. We don't know. So what does this mean for the CEO? What in your mind then is what CEOs do to build consensus? Because that's really what we're talking about, is how do you light that fire? How do you continue it? And how do you build whatever new product you have out there or new organization suddenly takes hold?
So the CEO should be able to project the future and think about the trees and then the forest. And then not only the forest, the hills afterwards, and see where we're going. So he should have the long-term vision, but being able to translate that and communicate that properly to his workers and employees, to make sure they believe in it. Not just this is the way it is, I say this. You should communicate, why do we want to do this? Why are we going in this direction? What is happening? Always transparent. It's another important thing, so that the employees at a minimum trust you and don't think that you are an elite source of truth hoarder. You are the whatever religious figure or whatever politics, like dictatorship. As you communicate this properly, you can withstand any problems or whether any storms the company has, because your employees will believe in you. So even if you have to downsize, you don't have to, like, for example, let go of employees. You can say, well, we're going to take some pay cuts, but keep the ship afloat. Or you say, we're building a new product, we're getting metaverse, we're getting into this kind of world because I think this is what we want, and you listen to the feedback. Right. At some point, as a CEO, you have to make executive decisions and you have to be assertive, but communicating that is very important. And I think a lot of CEOs have been, well, not a lot. I mean, I think some CEOs actually are very good communicators, but I do see that as a pattern. Not only CEOs, C-suite executives, I would say, C-suite in general.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even the CEO. We've got a couple of comments and questions here, which I'll read in a second. But often it's the CMO, because what we're really talking to is a form of branding. The better branded you are, the more you show that you've tapped into a social truth. Now, you can say what comes first, if social truth or the marketing, the branding, and becoming the social truth. I think it's a combination of both. But there is tons of money that has flown, through the coffers to make words like Kleenex stand actually for tissue to become a social truth, Amazon to become a social truth,
Google as opposed to
Google,
search it.
yeah, because it's now become part of the language. You Google something, so it's gone beyond the firm. So those are now sources of truth. But we have a couple of questions now. So hi, Lori. What advice would you give to rebuild corporate structures with smarter technology and more inclusive values? You want to take a crack at that?
Sure. Can you repeat what advice could you repeat the question?
What advice would you give to rebuild corporate structures with smarter technology and more inclusive values? So I think what she's talking about is a kind of change management, which is you have a corporation and something happens that the corporation no longer is a source of truth, or running into financial difficulties. So I think she's really talking about digital transformation of companies. Smarter technology and a better value. And the value part is really an interesting question. We can talk about that in a second. So what thoughts do you have on that?
Sure.
Because you deal with that.
You hit it ahead. What we do work is digital transformation and change management. So that means we identify, from the question, we can assume there's a state where the enterprise was in that's not working or that's not good, and we have to move it to a new state. First thing is, technology isn't the best solution, but smart technology is the way to put it. Having good communication between different parts of the enterprise. This is very important. Having the communication streamlined. So streamlining a lot of operations, a lot of disintermediation, a lot of cutting some middlemen between the decision makers and the other parts. I would say I've seen something called mobile first philosophy. A lot of companies could benefit or should think about having a mobile app, depending on how big you are, as a big component of your strategy, far more than having a well-designed website and communication. Inclusive, you have to, that's what they talk about consensus. You have to have different people being able to engage in the decision making. Again, I don't want to think the CEO should have a vision and should be able to make assertive decisions and executive decisions.
Yeah.
But being able to expose the logic behind it and talk to others about it is important.
So then, communication is key. Communication absolutely is key. And it goes even beyond just the CEO. Because after all, how do you get the word out? You have to communicate properly. You have to have a good value proposition, people who can distribute that in a very compelling way, and have it easily recognizable as indeed value creating.
And the mobile first is important because most people now access the internet through their mobile devices, not through the browser.
Right.
So a lot of our work we find with different types of companies, different verticals, essentially, if we build a mobile app for you, it'll resolve a lot of problems. This employee is having trouble uploading this PDF file, or I have to upload this pie chart, and then I have to convert it to Excel. And it's hard to run a website on a mobile device as opposed to a native mobile app.
Yeah. And I think that brings us also to the whole question of mobility becoming a social truth. The social truth being that, quite honestly, a lot of people are better off, happier, not having to come to a central place, an office, but to work decentralized. And that challenges CEOs quite a bit, which is you have to build consensus on your culture, coming back to culture, in a decentralized manner. You know, you may have a headquarters with like 5 people there or 20 or whatever, but you may have thousands of people who are working decentralized. You have to be able to build consensus very quickly in a decentralized workforce. And indeed, inclusive values that Nori brings up are really important because, again, if you can't be inclusive, then how the hell are you going to be able to build consensus? You have to build a big enough tent so that all sorts of types of people find a home and say, that's of use to me. I need that. That's true of Kleenex because everybody at some point needs some Kleenex, a tissue. And that's true of Amazon because books are, after all, a huge source of truth. But we have another question, though. Fred Costa says hello, by the way. Guy Fava, his question is, I wasn't expecting a philosophical intro to the talk. I wasn't either until we talked about it. But since it was brought up, what do you mean by social truth? Isn't truth exclusive by definition? Now, you have the great honor of being with 2 guys who want to think out of the box. We knew this was going to go beyond just business. By the way, we haven't mentioned religion. We decided not to discuss religion here. Just because it's never helpful, really.
So, John, as you're asking this question about philosophy, I had to reach. This is my plagued book. I've been plagued by reading philosophy, and that's why I'm sorry.
And that's also why you're successful. There's something I have to say about American business culture that has always bothered me, as opposed to especially European. I spent the last 10 years working in Germany. Is Germans and Europeans in general value an excellent general education. It's inconceivable to think of all the CEOs that I worked with over in Germany who didn't have understanding of Plato and Aristotle, who didn't read history, who you need to learn and grow. So yes, you were surprised by the philosophical interest of this talk, but in theory, any deep thinking about business, especially when it means a change, a disruption, a new and better way of doing things, sort of, it's not plucked from the sky. Most CEOs or most innovators, engineers have to think a lot, and not just about the technology, but the application of technology. And that is about the human experience. It's nothing else. It has nothing to do with little nuts and bolts, well, not in these days, but butts and bytes. Now, social truth. Great question. I don't know if it's exclusive by definition, but we define social truth as that sort of generally agreed to principle of the way it is. What is reality? This is why I'm fascinated by this topic, because right now, this is exactly the international debate is what is truth? And for me, most of it you can define as social truth. It's what people, as a general rule, accept as truth. The problem is right now we've had many of those cards thrown up in the air in the political sphere. In the business world, there is so much work that has to go into changing a social truth that, you know, very few people can afford. Well, one, get the capital they need, plus have the vision, plus have the management capabilities. But social truth is sort of generally regarded truths. So, you know, there's some that we think are no-brainers. Gravity. We're learning that the universe thinks of gravity differently, or it's different than what we think it is. But we, at least up until recently, you know, an apple falls from a tree, therefore this gravity, something, you know, a planet attracts things so that it falls down. You know, some very basics about death, when death occurs and so forth. These are all social truths, but there are also social truths around building a community, providing the community what they need, having a well-functioning financial system that tends to, at least up until recently, be centralized. Those are social truths, generally accepted ways of doing things or ways of being that have enough consensus that they become true. I don't know, Ahmed, what would you say to that?
You touched upon it perfectly. The opportunity and objective, or is it subjective? Are we looking at the shadows of the things, or are we looking at the things themselves? And you need to be able to disconnect as the decision maker. When we talk about the C-suite, to think in abstract form. Am I reading this properly or not? Abstract ideas, not implementations of the ideas. Abstract ideas is what the C-suite should be thinking about. Thinking abstract, not how do I increase profit per se. Maybe that's something an operational person does. That's
or
tactical,
the CFO.
that's
The CFO is the one that sits there. Yeah.
But thinking about the abstract, where am I going? Or what are we doing? And able to explain that in simple terms. The social truth. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go. Keep going.
So, you illuminated on the idea of social truth. So the perception of it could be mistaken. Obviously, you know, 80 years ago, it was thought that smoking was a very good thing. It was prescribed.
Well, it wasn't. It was a recreational activity. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bottom was taken for granted, and you know.
Yeah.
So things do change, and again, we're going back to change management. Is there objective truth in business? No. Companies might have can keep itself abstractly. Like, for example, I think Apple is a technology luxury company. It's not a tech development firm. It's a luxury company. It's
or it's a design,
technology
design. Yeah, it's like,
yeah.
I think of it as a design company.
But high end, I think of like, it's not in the business of building mobile, it's business of building luxury products, luxury technology.
Accessories.
Definitely
accessories.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I think of it. It can maintain that. The underlying could change, but the idea is the same.
Yeah. And for me, you know, there are some social truths in corporate America, and this has been an interesting time to be living through an attempted change in social norms and social truths. Companies have recognized, because it's rooted in economics, it's one of the reasons why we have a vibrant economy, which is we have worked very hard as corporations in the United States, sort of, and I mean also bigger entities, but in general, and our laws have followed it, that to get more people into the workforce doing work and getting paid for it is a good thing for society. And that bias and what's the word I'm looking, you know, sexual gender bias, ethnic discrimination is bad, because it limits people from getting to the world, getting jobs. And that has been the economic engine really for the last 30, 40 years, is this inclusiveness. So when that's questioned, it's not going to go very far, because it's very hard in economic terms to justify any different anything different than what we have, which is low barriers to entry for all mankind, besides the idealistic part of it. But we know for a fact the more people who are earning means the velocity of money is faster. And your, women in the workforce have traditionally now that they can work, they're included, a lot of things don't get done at the house. What was traditionally a non-paying role for a housewife to do all this stuff, bake and clean and everything. Now you've got whole workforces that have been allowed into the, people allowed into the workforce to do that work. But here, boy, we have a lot of interesting comments.
Let's make a couple of comments, John, while you read the next question. When we talk about the women participation and other minorities, the more people engage in economic activity in the society, the more stable and the more flourishing it becomes. So going back to the idea of the social truth and the stratification of society, the thicker the middle class and you have people engaged in it and activate in it, the more stable and the more prosperous the society is. When you have a small elite that claim to have access to the social truth, and they are the guardians of it, then you'd have this kind of disruptive mindset where you can have change is inevitable. It could be volatile and violent, like revolutions and like companies crashing, or you can handle the change yourself as a C-suite by recognizing you need to have a core concept, but flexible to adapt. Because if you stay too static, you'll break. And of course, if you're too fluid, you have no moral compass. You have no essence.
But I don't have moral compass, but yeah, you have. It's hard to pinpoint what's going on, which is going to bring me to another point in a second.
So yeah, so I think a good executive steers and adapts to change while maintaining some core principles. But if you're too rigid, you'll crash, or someone else is going to take over. Amazon is becoming the big name now. Although it was a disruptor, now it's the disruptee. Now it's the mainstream.
Potential disruptee. Yeah, and that whole concept of what you just said is very interesting. Is finding the balance between being too flexible and too rigid. Now, Nori asks a key question, which is, what is the method for consensus decision making? First, I have to say one of the core things, we talked about the importance of communication to consensus building. And that, in my world, in the world that I think we're talking about, this not being too flexible but not too rigid, it's something I call repetitive communications. You say the same thing over and over again. You watch out for riffing too much on a topic because you might lose people. This is the whole point of taglines and special things like "just do it" or "think different." Apples, these words, because that gets stuck in the mind. And you just see it over and over and over and over again, and it kind of infiltrates all external communications because it's like a musical theme. The more you hear something, and if it's well crafted, the more you remember it, you start humming it. So that's one of the key things about building consensus is consistency of message, repetitive communication, I call it. But in terms of decision making, consensus building decision making, I would say, is a little bit like in Japan they call nemawashi, where you're socializing the precepts, the boundaries, or the decision, the question that has to be solved, the decision that has to be made. So while you're socializing it, you're getting feedback on the decision. And then by the time you make the decision, you've got at least enough people in the company who get where you're coming from, understand the issue that had to be decided on and how it was decided. So it is part of getting a decision is actually building consensus by talking to key stakeholders. And I say stakeholders, which is employees, often the community, suppliers, all these different groups. And in the process of making a decision and building the consensus, you've already started the great virtuous cycle of having your product or your company become a centralized product or institution.
Beautifully written. Beautifully said. You have to communicate. The decision maker, which is the C-suite, might have a different view from everybody else does have a different view of all the important company. So you don't have to explain all the details of it, but you have to. Your job is to communicate, simmer down, and see how can you get your vision across to someone who works in a small department. How does the tree fit in the forest, and how does the forest fit amongst the other forests and the whole landscape? So it's very hard mentally. That's why you have to be a very good communicator. That's why you have to be able to use analogies properly to explain. You don't have to explain all that. You don't have to tell a small, like an entry-level employee about the financial balance sheets we have and the FFO's, funds from operations. But you have to simmer down into simple terms. And that's one thing I would say you'll find a lot with successful and with the opposite of with bad managers. Successful managers, first of all, C-suite executive, use simple terms. Do not hide behind fancy vocabulary.
Exactly.
You know, whenever I said a lot of presentations where startups are telling me we're about to do this, we're going to do AI and blockchain. I'm like, okay, what is it trying to do? They never simmer down the things. They just use fancy buzzwords. And that is a sign, by the way, of a bad manager.
Or a faulty product. If they can't really explain it, if they're rolling it out and you still don't understand it, then yes, it might be a bad manager, but it also just may be a product that's not ready for market, or even a bad product.
Okay. Yeah, it could be like something that doesn't need to exist, something that's not really relevant to the market. So give communication and simple terms using analogies. Nobody is stupid. Smart people, I've talked to very smart people, I'm sure you too, John. Smart people use simple words. You only use the complex words if you need to, but you have to use dichotomy and duality and this and that to show off your vocabulary. The idea of language is to communicate, not to show off vocabulary.
Yeah, and that added complexity can certainly, I can assure you that the more complex and more convoluted the language is around something, one is you can hide behind it, and we've already said it probably means that it's not good. But more importantly, you'll never build consensus. But who's going to remember something complex, and how is it going to get rooted among?
On a side note, I don't know if I mentioned this to you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
I do get, so because we got involved in tech investments, and so I do get paid by institutional investors to read white papers from startups and look at, even from law firms, to look for unsubstantiated claims. And one of the red flags is using the complex words. So then if someone tells me there's a new stealth startup that's asking for a 9-figure line of credit, and they claim they have a new chip or they know something.
Right.
We do qualitative due diligence where I come and look at their documents and see not the numbers, not like code per se. I'd have my team do that if I need to, but does it make sense? Does the statement make sense? The change that you claim that you have a new product, an innovative technology. What was the technology state before? And can you explain to me what is it afterwards? That's a qualitative way. And I interview the C-suite. And based on that, I think, okay, you know what? There's a red flag. This guy's using too many buzzwords. And you mentioned Germany. I have a friend of mine who's a German who just moved to the US. He works for one of the big accounting firms. And he tells me he's in audit. He's a partner in one of the audit departments. He tells me one of the red flags they look for is if an American executive is telling us about his financials, and he knows that I'm a German and I don't speak English fluently, and he uses fancy words, that's a big red flag. You should know that English is not my first language. You should simplify things. Otherwise, we're going to audit the crap out of you.
And that's other. There are some things that just can't be translated into another language. I mean, languages do have different tautologies and so forth. And sometimes, when you read, especially when I read something in German, and I think, I don't know how they're going to say it in English. Sometimes you have to do a complete overhaul of what works in German, especially if it's a word play. But you bring up some very good points. The hard part I find, or I should say, when I started out as a consultant to the C-suite strategy consultant, I learned very quickly a very important thing that I tell everybody who wants to interface with the C-suite, especially the CEO, which is pretend you're talking to a 3-year-old. You have to be able to explain something complex like you would to your young child, because it's very easy to take a technical subject or something, and it still can be good, but it's very easy to want to get down into the nits and bits and the subsidiary issues. What you need to do is be able to stick to the main messages, constantly. But we have one other little comment, and then I think we'll wrap it up. Guy says, he asks whether there is it's a theory. He posits the fact that it's just a theory, that there is a social theory of truth or a social attempt to define truth. And that I find fascinating. Is it a theory, and what is a theory? And are theories real, and are they true?
This is a deep question.
Yeah, it really is.
The ancient Greeks believed in objective truth. That means, for example, if an event happened that nobody witnessed it, it still did happen. For example, if a tree falls in the forest, did it fell, or it's just nobody?
Did anybody hear it?
Did anybody hear? Yeah. If you believe that there's no objective truth and everything is subjective, I think that leads to dangerous repercussions.
Yeah, now, I think we're witnessing it right now with the splintering.
That everything's subjective.
Yeah, because it's all subjective.
Means, if it's all subjective, that means there's no concept of truth per se. That means I can potentially steal under the right circumstances.
That's true. Yeah, if there's no social truth around justice, the justice system, and you can steal, and that suddenly becomes like, okay as a social truth, we can spin it further, and we understand. Social truth, I believe, comes very much from our will to survive. Social truths are built and reinforced with sources of truth, because it means a certain social truth means one, not only survival, but also a better life, aspirational. So, and that's why we had this thing in, January 6th, was because a central institution, the U.S. government, represents really the beacon of democracy for the world, is under attack. Our social truth, and I think we're beginning to realize that it was in no way a social truth, that it was necessary or that it was based on anything other than lies, and that threatens our experience, our existence. Non-social truths being touted as social truths are destructive for our species, and our natural survival instinct takes us, for the most part, to start grouping around social truths that truly are truths.
You said the important word here, which is grouping. Social contract theory is what permeates us. We all agree that we all are Americans. We all use the U.S. dollar. Groups, humans should live in groups. If you want to make your own social truth here, but that means you become too independent, and then you become isolated. Then you can go to an island and live by yourself.
Yeah,
but as long as you want to share, exactly.
No, we learned that in COVID.
Society. Yeah, with the people being cooped up, and
our social truths went nuts. I mean, seriously, there are people with PTSD, and we know that includes also a brain that starts going in weird places. That is a perfect belief. That's a perfect example that it's more than a theory. Without social truths, because a lot of them fell by the wayside when you're not coming in contact with people, start falling apart. January 6th would not have happened had we not had COVID. There's a bunch of people have been sequestered. See, they were sequestered, and then your brain starts to go in different places. It is exactly what you said. It's the interaction of human beings that demand some social truth to enable us to survive together.
Yeah, it permeates our existence. We all agree that we can use this language. We all agree that we put
that it's bad to go to or it's bad to go to the U.S. government and go and chicken and waffle. Right? I don't know how much of a social truth that is, but social truth that if you attack the Capitol, you're attacking democracy, and that cannot be good for the world, because democracy exactly is what we're talking about, which is everybody, inclusion. Everybody is included and should be included, and everybody has a vote and everybody has a say. And if you start attacking that because of some other social truth you believe in, that threatens our survival as a species. It just does. That's the truth. That's not a theory.
Now notice, because we have such I claim, compared to the rest of the world, a stable, somewhat democratic system, these guys were able to do damage. In other societies where there's extreme control of the source of truth, you'd have violent, bloody revolutions.
Yeah, it would become much more difficult.
Very difficult. So it's a thing that we have the capacity for nut jobs who did this on January 6th. I mean, of course, I'm not condoning. I think bad things happen, but the system allows for even the obscure the somewhat unstable, the somewhat crazy, to make a statement. And I think you should be able to communicate that.
Yeah,
So maybe
you should
bringing
be
back
able
to
to
the
include them.
enterprises.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go back to enterprise. Some of the companies have an anonymous, let's talk, let's chat. Now, of course, a company is there to produce value, to add value as a product or a service.
Right.
So if someone really doesn't believe in your vision, he or she shouldn't be part of the company. That's
Right.
very simple. So you have the right to say, you know what?
Think about it, though.
This
The
is what-
values and the vision are the social truth for that company.
Yes.
If you don't
So
believe
you
in
don't
the
have to-
social truth.
You don't have to come all views if they disagree with you. If I'm a cardiologist and I want to start a cardiology practice, and you're a Snickers salesman, and you tell me sugar is bad, sugar is good, I'm saying sugar is bad. No, we have a different perspective. My whole idea of the company is sugar is bad. So I cannot have Snickers at the gym or Mars or like a muffin.
Well, and that's why they're shifting. That's why McDonald's and Mars and all these producers of the unhealthy food are beginning to find alternatives and either replacing, well, Snickers hasn't done it, but certain candies with healthier food.
Yeah.
McDonald's was able to get a stock price back up because they really shifted their whole social truth, which is it's not about fatty hamburgers, it's also about healthy food. But it's been a great conversation. It's always lots and lots of fun talking to you, Ahmed. Yes, this was a little bit different in the fact that we really went into philosophical things, but I believe very strongly that CEOs who aren't comfortable with these kind of conversations and or don't take the time to have these conversations, to think like this, are doing a disservice to their companies and to society. And most really fine CEOs do indeed look at everything from nature, natural occurrences, what happens in nature, to philosophy and so forth. So one last comment for Guy, and then we'll wrap up. Agreed. Truth is objective and not subjective. That's why social truth or any other type of truth doesn't sound objective. Truth is truth. Exactly. However, I enjoyed the discussion. Thank you very much for the talk. This is what makes the discussion so much fun. But thank you again, Ahmed. And I will see everybody again next week with a rebroadcast of whether it's a consumer or the employee who's important to a CEO. And then we'll be having an interesting conversation around career difficulties and when your career stalls, how you get out of that. And that'll be in 2 weeks with my friends Jonathan Phillips and Alan Byrne. So thank you very much. And for those of you watching the video, I hope you get as much out of this as the people who joined us live.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, John.
Thank you.